Hi, this is Judith Dreyer. Thank you for joining me for this podcast series, The Holistic Nature of Us. My intent is to take us, you and I, into a better understanding of the concepts behind our holistic nature and how that ties directly to the holistic nature of the world around us. How can we connect the dots in practical ways that we are nature and nature is in us? I will be featuring authors and educators, practitioners, and others whose passion for this earth helps us create bridges. We'll see what's trending, what's relevant to our world today, not just for land use, but to connect the dots between nature and ourselves. It's time for practical action and profound interchange so our natural world is valued once again. Today I'm delighted to introduce you to Mark Shepard, founder of the Restoration Agricultural Development Firm known as RAD, which is a full-service environmental consulting, research, and development firm committed to developing agricultural ecosystems that provide nutritious food for humankind while enhancing the life-supporting ecosystem services of planet Earth. Mark, as a founder, has over 30 years of experience in environmental consulting, production agriculture, and real estate development. RAD itself has worked on 100 products or more in multiple climates across 4 continents. Through active ecosystem management, RAD combines ecological restoration with agricultural development to improve your landscape. Good morning, Mark. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Morning, Judith. That was a mouthful you just went through.
I know, but it's important. I want my listeners to know the wonderful things that your company's doing. I'm excited to hear more about it because we know that there's some very serious problems out there, one of which is monocrop farming and the hole we've dug for ourselves with not understanding how to take care of our land and our natural resources. So, Mark, tell us something about your company and your passion and how you got going.
Wow, that's a long story, much longer than we have time for. But basically, all of what I do and what I've been doing, both professionally and personally, inner work, all of that for the past, since I was 18 years old anyways, was how do we as human beings live on this planet, one, without screwing it up worse, and two, making it actually better, more healthy, more productive through time. So I trained in ecology at Unity College in Maine, and shortly after graduating, took my sweetheart up to Alaska, and we homesteaded in the bush 300 miles northeast of Anchorage for 8 years. And it's everything that you've ever heard in storybooks as far as how beautiful and brutal and all that kind of stuff that it is. And what I realized really obviously in your face was that we were actually eating like a colonial parasitic being. We were buying food in grocery stores in town, 6 hours away, hauling it all out, and the food that we were eating came from annual agriculture. And annual agriculture is the agriculture that depends on annual plants. An annual plant is one that you plant the seeds in the spring of the year. It grows through one season, and then the plant dies. Annual plants have a role in nature. They colonize immediately after a disturbance. If a tree blows down or there's silt deposited on a floodplain or a landslide, the first plants that come in are annual plants. They grow, they produce a prodigious amount of seeds, and then those seeds are able to persist until the next disturbance, which could be, 3 years, 5 years, 400 years. And then once that disturbance happens, the seeds spring up again. The problem with relying on annual plants for our staple foods, our carbohydrates, proteins, and oils, is the fact that we have to destroy a perennial ecosystem every single season just to plant our annual plants. And once you destroy that ecosystem, you have short-circuited all of the beneficial life aggrading cycles on that particular site. You're no longer building soil. You're no longer promoting soil life. You're no longer promoting biodiversity. You're no longer creating clean air and clean water. In fact, you're contributing to just the opposite, a depauperization of wildlife, insect life, soil life. Soil carbon is off-gassing into the atmosphere. Soil is washing away into the streams. That's what annual agriculture does when it's practiced at the scale that it is. So some of my goals were, how do I personally not participate in that system anymore? Mm-hmm. So that meant acquiring real estate, mm-hmm. which, if you can imagine a student right out of college, $50,000 in debt, is really not in a position to purchase a lot of real estate and pay for it. Mm-hmm. They get creative. So I learned a whole bunch of creative real estate investment strategies, began purchasing properties, and one of the easiest, most affordable pieces of real estate that you could get is a clear cut. So I bought a clear cut, was one of my first pieces of property. And then later on, you can get a washed out, worn out, eroded farm for also on the low end of the spectrum. And both of those situations, a clear cut that's been just every single tree harvested and taken away, even the stumps pulled out and chipped, that site needs ecological rehab. Well, an eroded, washed out farm needs ecological rehab. Well, how do you do the ecological restoration? A restorationist might come in and start planting all kinds of seeds of native species, start to manage with fire. A lot of restorationists use a lot of herbicides, and they manage a natural system, and it's all expense. Whereas the idea of a restoration agriculture, and that's the title of my book, my first book is Restoration Agriculture, is that we can actually do the ecological restoration by farming the property a certain way. Mm-hmm. And so what we do is we go, whether we're working on your site, somebody else's site, industrial reclamation situation, we imitate the local plant community types. Mm-hmm. And then arrange them in such a way that the rainfall that falls on the site is redistributed evenly and doesn't have like erosion gullies, etc. Mm-hmm. We plant them in rows following the water management pattern so that we can actually plant the trees mechanically, maintain them mechanically, harvest them mechanically if desirable. Mm-hmm. And so we pick trees, shrubs, bushes, vines, perennial ground covers, that are mimics of a natural plant community type. And if you think about the brush on the side of the road, it grows all by itself with no care and no expense to take care of it. Mm-hmm. And there's all kinds of food plants growing out there. Well, why can't we go in and plant a natural system mm-hmm. that happens to have food in it? So mm-hmm. when we harvest that food, it was free because we did very little work to acquire it. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean you don't have to do any work. And if you want to nudge parts of the system with more intensive management, that's your choice as a landowner. So there are people who really push it for production side, and there are people who are totally hands-off and let it evolve and change on its own.
That's really interesting. You started this when going green and ecological restoration was probably a very new concept.
It was very new, and back when I first got started, one of my first jobs, ecological restoration, meant getting the leaky oil drums and chemical drums out of a brownfield, and that was the extent of it. That was called restoration. Mm-hmm. It's changed a lot since then.
Well, you're doing so much more. I'm in the master gardener field. I don't claim to be a great gardener. I'm more in the meadow, wild plant field than anything. That's where my passion is. And I have not heard about monocrop farming, referred to as annual agriculture. But what you said, that we destroy that ecosystem with every monocrop that we harvest, is a point that I don't think my listeners are aware of. I don't think most of us are aware of the consequences on that level of what we're doing with our monocrop farming.
And I don't know where most of your listeners are located. Well, let's just use your example of where you live in Connecticut. There are disturbances that happen in nature. Disturbances happen. There'll be ice storms that break things all over the place. Big tornado bops in and rips a hole. Mm-hmm. Hurricane smashes through. The hurricane of 38 was devastating to the New England states. And then it knocks a whole bunch of trees over. It rips up root balls and has exposed soil all over the place. A process begins called succession, mm-hmm. Natural succession, and that the first plants to colonize are predominantly annual plants with those hard seeds. Then some biennials come in that last 2 years, sometimes 3 years. then perennials in the grassland phase. So if we think about a prairie isn't a thing. It's not a static form. It's a phase in succession as that ecosystem is developing. Once it goes through the grassland phase, there are sun-loving plants that will colonize a site, sun-loving woody plants that colonize a site, perennials. Then once the sun-loving perennials close the canopy, such as the case in Connecticut, if it's a humid environment like New England states, the grasses underneath will eventually die. You'll get a thick duff layer on the forest floor. You'll have a lot of spring ephemerals like lady slippers and cardinal flower, dogtooth violet, that sort of thing. You'll actually get less photosynthesis going on because the photosynthesis turns into this top layer on top of the forest, and it's deep and dark underneath and some little plants below. Well, if you let that same process occur in, say, California, for example, once the sun-loving trees close the canopy, you lose the grass component down below. All of a sudden, there's too many trees for the actual rainfall that falls, and there's a collapse in diversity, and then the system simplifies into a scrub chaparral, a brushland, a shrubland. So what you have with the closed canopy forests of New England and the scrub chaparral brushlands of California are two systems that have had long periods of time without disturbance. The disturbance is what nature does to, basically the reset button for the whole thing. Mm-hmm. The disturbance can keep it in this phase where we get maximum photosynthetic surface area. So we've got green all the way from the ground, all the way up to the top, all the way down, all the way up, all the way down. And that phase in nature is the savanna phase. And if you think of the savannas, mostly the large remaining ones now are in Africa, mm-hmm. where you have grasslands and trees and shrubs. What's the thing that you see the most in these savannas? What's the most striking in savannas of the world? Mammals. There are mammals everywhere, all over the place. The savannas are the homeland to mammals. There are specialists that live in closed canopy forests and shrublands and desert and all that, but the savanna is where most of the mammal diversity is. And therefore, if we are mammals, isn't that kind of our ecosystem where we were adapted, evolved, created, planted, whatever, sent from the geocentric spaceship at the South Pole? We're savanna people.
Right. That's funny. Continue on. That's interesting. I had a chance to visit a savanna in Africa.
Where did you go?
I went to Tanzania.
Whereabouts?
Went to the Serengeti, the Ngorongoro crater.
Isn't the crater beautiful?
It's absolutely gorgeous, and the wildlife that's there is stunning. It's breathtaking and stunning.
When were you in Fahamu Kiswahili kidogo?
Just Jumbo. That's all I know. I can remember from my African trip. That was a little while ago. So, but that's interesting. So, again, you're an expert at understanding the succession of changes that occurs in a system. So, take me to an example. Give me an example of one of the farms you've helped, and how has that worked out?
Well, the farm, you see a picture of it right behind me here, that I've been on personally. I've lived here for the past 24 years. It's New Forest Farm in southwest Wisconsin. Mm-hmm. It's smack dab in the middle of the oak savanna, the Midwestern oak savanna complex. And in an oak savanna, the oak plant community type. Now, every place you go around the world, there are plant community types that will grow there. Mm-hmm. In like northern Maine, there'll be a lot more pine plant community types associated with that, hickory, pecan, etc. But in the oak plant community type, we have an overstory of the Fagaceae, which are oak, chestnut, or beech, an understory of prunus, which are cherries, and malus, which are apples. Some other prunuses are shrub forms, which are plums. One of the dominant shrubs in the Midwest was American hazelnut. Shade tolerant shrub underneath were currants and gooseberries. There's grapes climbing all over the whole mess, raspberries and blackberries that are growing out in the grass. The whole thing has grass all the way through it, and mammals. And so if we go mimic that system, if I'm going to pick one from oak, chestnut, or beech, I've got all three, mm-hmm. But I'm going to dominate the system with chestnut, because that one produces a crop every single year that I can either eat, sell, or harvest with livestock. With the cherry component or the apple component, instead of going with wild, black cherry and pin cherries, and with wild crab apples, why not go with domestic apples and domestic cherries, pie cherries, and so on. And so every little part of that system, substitute some improved cultivars, and then manage it similarly as it would be managed in nature. And the natural disturbances in the oak savanna in the Midwest would be fire or grazing. So the substitute for fire, although we have used fire on occasion, the substitute for fire that we use is mowing. So we'll mow and let the residue decompose. Mm-hmm. And then grazing, we substitute cattle and hogs mostly, also poultry. Sometimes we've had sheep. We substitute those animals for the dominant grazing animals that were here before people got here. Do you know what those were?
No.
Mastodons. The Boaz mastodon is the first skeleton, or it's basically the mastodon skeleton that ended the debate of whether human beings actually butchered and ate mastodons in North America. Boaz, Wisconsin. There goes a noise. Boaz, Wisconsin is 5 miles down the road. That's where they found that skeleton.
Wow, and did we actually eat the mastodon?
Yeah, humans have been elephant eaters for a long time. But part of the whole point of why the elephant, you've been to Africa. I don't know if you ever saw a herd of elephants working over a grove of trees. Once that canopy closes, they're in there and they're pushing trees over, ripping them right out of the ground. They're pushing them over. Then everybody else eats the leaves, and they'll break off branches and eat the branches. One of the interesting things about the savanna, the oak savanna plant community type, is every one of those species can be burned completely to the ground and it'll sprout back. Every one of those species can be, knocked down and uprooted by a windstorm or an elephant or a tractor or a chainsaw, and they sprout back. So what we have is a system that once it's planted and established, it's there basically forever. And all we do is harvest the yields from it. And if it was designed as an agricultural system, do you think you can eat chestnuts and apples and cherries and plums and grapes and raspberries and currants and gooseberries? Oh, I forgot a major component of this. We're producing so much biomass in the form of leaves, twigs, mm-hmm. branches, bark, root exudates. What eats carbon in the economy of nature is fungus. Mm-hmm. And fungus is going to show up to decay all of this organic matter. We might as well inoculate it with the fungus that we can eat or sell, which is what we do.
So you do inoculation in your forest system there.
Well, and technically it's not a forest system.
Okay.
The part of the system I allow to go to closed canopy forest, and that becomes forest. This particular one we're intentionally managing as a savanna, as an open, 30 to 60% canopy closure. There's always grass growing everywhere on a whole 110 acres. There's always trees growing everywhere on 110 acres. But it's not an entire grassland and it's not an entire forest. It's a savanna.
Mm-hmm. So you have the best of both worlds.
Right.
Yeah.
I eat well.
And what?
And I eat well.
I bet you do. This is fascinating. I did come across a YouTube video from, I believe it was either Argentina or possibly Brazil, where they were taking fallow land, just land that had not been used. It was desolate. The soil was very poor quality. They planted specific banana-type trees down there, and they cut them every day, and they allow all that leaf to fall on the ground, and they're actually building up soil. But the one fact that I didn't know is that they're actually creating more rainfall, that by doing this and by taking over this desert type land, we can bring in rainfall to support the crops. And again, it's another aspect of looking at nature and how nature functions so that we can have vibrant, healthy food using what's in front of us.
Yeah, and part of what I was mentioning with clear cuts and degraded agricultural land, I believe that's probably Ernst Getsch down in Brazil, who's doing that work right there. Of anybody doing ecosystem mimicry, more similar to me of anybody else, he's the guy who's doing it. And of course, being I believe he's either Dutch or German, he has a real tendency for neatness, and everything is in perfect order. I'm just wild American; things go a little woolly on my farm. But in either case, part of what what you'll notice is we can go into land where right now nobody's considering it agriculturally valuable land. It's not the top producing agricultural land. So we're not taking land out of food production in order to do an ecological restoration. We're taking land where agriculture can't go or has been and failed before, and we're going to restore it ecologically using agriculture as that practice. And we get all of the benefits of a natural system, in that we have, all kinds of endangered wildlife starts to come back, streams and rivers come back. There's a project in Uganda that I've worked on that it only took 4 years to make a river come back.
That's amazing to me. It's amazing to me because we get the dire and the gloom out there from some media sources. We only have 12 years to make a difference. And how do you change a 1,000-acre farm into something more sustainable in 2 years or 3 years? But it sounds like you know how to begin that process and to get it going.
Well, the process that will happen on that site, whether humans participate in it or not, the process that will occur is natural succession. So if we know where that property is, we know what the site conditions are, soil type, general rainfall patterns, what species will work there, we set up a successional pathway, and then we farm it through successional time. And New Forest Farm has paid its own way. It has paid for itself to be restored all along the way since day one. So if we can take a 100-acre property in Wisconsin and have it, pay its own way and have a fully vibrant system in 15 years, we can do it all over the whole entire planet at a profit. It's really pretty simple. But what we're not doing is we're not doing orcharding the way we think of orcharding. We're not growing crops the way people think of growing crops. It's going to look different, and that's okay. It's more of a natural system. We may not get as much yield per crop. Behind me is a system that has asparagus. This is asparagus and chestnuts and raspberries. We only get about half the yield of asparagus, half the yield of chestnuts, about a quarter of a yield of raspberries. Oh, and we also will graze cattle through there and pigs through there. So we get 5 different things coming off the same system. Did you hear any place where I mentioned inputs? Did I add fertilizer? Did I spray? Did I, kind of work that I do besides harvest and manage? So we may get lower individual yields per crop, but because our inputs are dramatically lower, there's actually more margin left behind for the landowner at the end of the day.
So again, you're talking about something that's economically feasible based on the parameters you just explained,
right,
which we all need to give us the impetus, so to speak, to make the changes. We need to know we can make a profit. We need to know that there's a return on our investment, so to speak. So I listened to at the BFA, which is where I met you folks recently, and one of the gals there talked about farms out in Iowa, whatever, and she had a kind of a sad story to tell us about how we're not doing enough. The mindset of some of the old timers is, well, this is the way I've always been doing it. I don't want to change. What do you say to that?
Well, it would be nice if that changed. There are so many people that are changing, and they are changing so fast. There are so many people that need help with that change that I'm helping those people. And the people who don't want to change, that's not my business at this point in time. If you want me to come in and convince you why you should change everything, I'm not going to play that game. If you want me to come in and help you change, I'm there. We'll help you out.
That's fantastic, though, because then you're using your incredible expertise and knowledge to help the people who want to be helped now, and they're going to make a difference now, today, based on your suggestions.
One of the big differences also about our company, RAD, and other ecological design companies is we don't just draw pretty pictures and say, here, go do it. Here's a management plan. No, we live this way. Every single one of us in our organization lives this way. So we have an intimate understanding of how these systems work. And since we live this way on our own properties, we know when a prescription that you might get on a management plan is stupid, because we've tried that before. And to live on a piece of property like here at New Forest Farm for the past 24 years and actually make a go at it
Mm-hmm.
isn't a simple task.
Mm-hmm.
So we've all learned a heck of a lot. And all of us are in different systems. There's one of our folks is in central Minnesota, more of a wet prairie situation. Mm-hmm. Johan and Lindsay are in New Jersey, and they're more in a shrub swamp situation. And then Karen is down in Arkansas in the Ozarks, where soil is like crushed rock, and it gets to be 300 degrees during the day. They get rain, but it happens in big, huge storms and goes right away. So we all have different experiences in different places, living in systems that we've designed.
Well, I like that. I know that's something that I would give high marks to, because that kind of experience is invaluable, because you can see some of the problems ahead of time. You can troubleshoot some things. And I know there's always surprises, but you're working with nature in a way that supports the sustainability of nature.
And when we're designing it after the local plant community types, when nature does something to your place, it's designed to tolerate that. And as an extreme example, let's use Paradise, California. There was some big fires that went through Paradise, California. Go look at aerial photographs of Paradise, California today. And what you'll see is the human stuff that was designed in denial of ecosystem fact. We put flammable things in a fire environment. That's what we call foolish planning, okay? Look at the trees. At the aerial photograph of the trees today, there are green trees alive. There are shrubs that are alive. The grasses will be springing back in the springtime. Why don't we design our human systems to be adapted to what nature throws at it? And whether the climate actually is changing or not, or we're getting more frequent storms or more frequent this or that or the other thing, these natural plant community types have been through it all. They've been through ice ages, volcanic cataclysms. They've been asteroid impact. They belong here. They're designed to deal with it. So if we use that as our model, how wrong can we go?
I agree with you. And the more that I talk to folks all over the country, the more I'm seeing beautiful efforts out there. I'm seeing incredible innovation out there, and I'm seeing people really are walking the talk. They're making a difference. Mark, one thing before we leave, do you have 3 tips that people can apply today in their own yards and their own landscapes?
Well, first of all, a big one is know your biome, know your plant community types. Where do you live? What are the natural native plants around you? That's a great place to start. Well, then, which plants that's around you in your area are edible, are medicinal, are useful for tying things or making baskets or clothes? Learn about the plants of your area, and then learn about a little bit about the economy of the first peoples that were here. How did they survive before technology and cell phones and all that kind of stuff? What did they eat? Where did they live? What were their dwellings like, et cetera, et cetera. Human beings have been living in every single environment on the planet except for Antarctica, but we already talked about the space station and all that. We've lived in every single environment around the globe during heat cycles, during cold cycles, and the highest technology that we had at the time was a stick and a stone. If human beings can survive anywhere on this planet with a stick and a stone, why can't you?
Well, that's because we can't easily, because we've stepped away from listening to nature's rhythms and how nature operates. We've forgotten to be observant. We've forgotten to walk in the silence in the forest and pay attention, and hopefully we're getting back to that, because we don't have time to waste.
Yeah. So that's why when you ask me what would be my recommendations, I immediately learn where do you live? What are the plants and animals around you? How can you live with this system, with this beautiful planet, interact with it, and help it be a better place?
I agree. And just one comment that's an aside. I remember years ago when the Mississippi River deeply flooded and caused great catastrophe. But my thought was, why do we build so close to a river for the view when it's supposed to flood its banks, and that's how it renews the soil. So again, we could talk another half an hour just on that alone.
A flood is not a natural disaster. A flood is natural.
Exactly.
We're making it worse with our agriculture because now our water's not soaking in and spreading out. It's just washing away real fast. And then we make it worse upon worse by going and building cities and towns down there. It's just poor planning.
It is. Well, Mark, I can't thank you enough. I think this has been very, very inspiring. I would love you to give your contact information and tell us the name of your book again and where people can find it.
Sure. The book is Restoration Agriculture. It's published by Acres USA, and that's where you can find it. You can contact Restoration Agriculture at restorationag.com. Right, restoration. Wait a minute.
Yep.
Restoration.ag. And then the tree and shrub breeding nursery, we didn't get to talk much about breeding the plants and animals once we get them in place. That's forestag.com. FORESTAG, forestag.com.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, I want to thank you again for your time, your expertise, and your practical advice. And thank you for joining all of us today. This is Judith Dreyer. I'm the author of At the Garden's Gate book and blog. My book is available through my website, which is www.judithdreyer.com, as well as several distribution arms such as Amazon, Nook, Goodreads, and more. I'd like to remind all of you that a transcript is available for each podcast. Please like and share them. Let's support each other and get the word out. And remember, now is the time for practical action and profound interchange so we can value our world again. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Judith. We'll talk to you again soon.
Bye now.
Bye.